All right, it is noon, and so we'll go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar. The topic today is financial questions you're too afraid to ask, but should. These are our top questions that we get when we're going out and doing education sessions, one-on-ones, or when clients come in and ask us different questions. My name is Heather Jordan. I'm the Managing Director for TrustPoint's Emerj360 division. I've been with TrustPoint for 6 years now and am a CFP or Certified Financial Planning Professional. So work with a lot of our clients on different financial planning topics, retirement planning topics, and things like that. Before we begin, just want to give an overview of who TrustPoint is and what Emerj360 does. So TrustPoint has been around for over 110 years now, so very, very long time. We are headquartered right here in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is where my office is. We also have an office in Minneapolis and Eau Claire. We have a bunch of different departments, which I'll touch on in a second, but we work with individuals, businesses, nonprofits, a lot of different areas, and a lot of focus on financial planning and financial education for the community. Across all of TrustPoint, we administer about 3,700 different accounts across 1,200 client relationships. And we've been voted the best place to work for 8 years in a row now. And we have a really great team, staff here of CPAs, trust officers, financial planners, attorneys, a lot of people on staff with a lot of different expertise to help clients with questions. So here you can see a little bit of a deeper dive into different areas that we provide services in. So retirement plans, we administer about 200 different 401k plans across all of TrustPoint. As part of that offering, we go out and do education for plan participants and offer one-on-one sessions. We do a lot of work with different trusts and estate administration. So a lot of people name TrustPoint as a corporate trustee to settle their estate. We do quite a bit with that, and then different trust administration accounts as well. We also work with individuals on the investment management aspects, people looking for a financial professional to work with on their investment assets, who are also looking for financial planning, maybe some tax planning, retirement planning, things like that. We have quite a few different foundations and nonprofits that we work with. And then most recently, we opened Emerj360 back in 2021, so about 4 years ago now. We focus on relationships that are 50,000 up to $1 million. So anything that comes into TrustPoint that's between that 50,000 up to $1 million is serviced in our Emerj360 division. We are a division within TrustPoint, so still part of TrustPoint, still part of that same company, but we provide financial planning for all of our clients and have really more of a modern and digital focus. So plan for today is we're going to cover kind of the top questions that we get, or the questions that we've heard people have that they are afraid to ask. We're going to cover what happens if I die without an estate plan. What's the difference between a stock, bond, mutual fund, and ETF? How do I know how much risk to take in my investments? How do investment providers get compensated, which is a really big one people are unsure about? Does everyone retire at 65? Should I pay off my debt or save for retirement? And what happens to my old 401k balances? So there was tons of questions we could have covered today, but these are kind of the ones that, again, come up at the forefront of meetings, or people are a little bit hesitant to ask us. So first question is, what happens if I die without an estate plan? Super common thinking that people think, I don't have 10 million in assets, I don't need an estate plan. There really is a purpose for the estate plan, and highly recommend that everyone has a plan in some way, shape, or form. It can look different for different people, but the objectives for an estate plan is to avoid intestacy, so avoid dying without a plan. This estate plan communicates your wishes. So a wish could be you want to leave your assets to your kids or your spouse or your friend. It really puts in writing where you want your assets to go when you pass. This provides for your spouse and your children, can plan for incapacity or disability. So who makes decisions when you're incapacitated? What do you want those decisions to be? Things like that. It can provide for creditor protection, helps figure out where your assets will go when you pass. Super important if you have minor children, you can choose the guardian for your children. So should you pass away, who will be taking care of them? And then it can also reduce income or estate taxes. So again, it's not necessary to have $10 million to have an estate plan. We recommend everyone has a will or revocable trust or at the very least, beneficiary designations on retirement accounts and IRA accounts. So what happens if you die without an estate plan? So you may or may not remember Prince died a while ago. He did not have an estate plan in place, which created a large mess of people claiming to be part of his estate or wanting to get a chunk of his estate. It was a very long estate settlement process because there was no document in place. So that's kind of a higher profile example of someone with quite a bit of wealth, very well-known person dying without that plan. So it goes to show you everyone needs a plan, whether you have $100,000, $100 million, super, super important to have that plan in place. So if you die without that plan, there can be or will be unintended consequences. Ultimately, the state is in control of where your assets pass and not you. So each state has an order of where assets go when you pass if you don't have a plan in place. This may or may not be how you would have wanted your assets to pass. So we really want you to be in charge of where your assets go when you pass. You've worked hard to save your funds, grow your estate, grow your wealth, grow your assets. Really important that you are in control and you get to decide where your assets go when you pass. If you die without a plan or don't have a plan in place, medical decisions may be made by unprepared family members. Part of an estate plan is your healthcare power of attorney. So who's going to make medical decisions for you if you're unable? What does that look like? Having that estate plan in place allows you to have conversations with the individuals you would want to make those decisions for on your behalf, and making sure the decisions that get made are the ones that you would agree with. This is a big one again for people with children, is that a judge would choose who would be the guardian for your kids. So you don't get to pick that if you don't have a plan in place. If you have kids, highly, highly recommend doing this as soon as possible, if for nothing else, to list that guardian for when you pass. And then probate is required to distribute property and assets that pass under these laws. So probate is that public court process that decides where your assets go and how they flow out. This can be an expensive process. It can be a timely, long time process to go through this. So have a plan in place, make sure it's updated if you have new family members or new important people in your life, and make sure you know where a copy of that document is stored and someone else knows where a copy of that document is stored. The basic documents we typically think of when we think of an estate plan is there's a traditional will or a revocable living trust. These are very similar. If you have a will, anything goes through that public probate court process. If you're a little bit more of a private person, you don't want your assets to go to that probate public process, that's where that revocable or living trust comes into place. That's kind of the starting point when you meet with an estate planning attorney of, which direction you want to go. There's tons and tons of more documents you could put in place for different purposes, but those are the primary ones we think of when we think of an estate plan. There's also a marital property agreement, and then beneficiary designations, PODs and TODs. So POD is payable on death and TOD is transfer on death. Beneficiary designations are who is listed on your accounts to receive your assets when you pass. So you should double check your 401ks, IRAs, make sure you have both primary and contingent beneficiary listed. We see people all the time who forget to list people here at all, or they forget to update them when they get divorced or remarried or have new children. So I always recommend reviewing those at least once per year or more often if you have a significant life change. There's also kind of a list of things that you can create. So if you have a super important piece of jewelry that you want to go to your daughter, or a vehicle you want to go to a friend, you are able to create that list of things that list specific items and who they can go to. There's durable power of attorneys and then healthcare directives. So all of this is kind of a package. When you work with your estate planning attorney, they'll cover what documents make sense for your situation and talk through pros and cons and what you should have in place going forward. Long story short with this, if you die without a plan, you lose control of how your assets will pass. Question number 2, what is the difference between a stock, bond, mutual fund, and ETF? So we'll talk in a second about which one is more aggressive, that riskier than other ones, but At a base level, a bond is also called fixed income. So if you hear your financial advisor or someone else talk about fixed income, that is a bond. So what it is essentially a debt investment in which an investor, so you, loan money to an entity, which is the issuer. The issuer borrows the funds for a certain length of time, and it's typically at a fixed interest rate. The issuer pays periodic interest payments called coupons, and then the full principal value at maturity. These are issued by federal and state governments, municipalities, different companies. Bonds are typically a little bit safer than stocks. Again, bonds the same as fixed income. So what is a stock? So a stock is equity. If you hear someone say, what percentage of your account is in equities, that's what percent is in stocks. This is essentially ownership. So it's a share of ownership in a certain company. The holder of the stock, which is the shareholder, has a claim to a part of the corporation's assets and earnings. Typically, people think of stocks as, I have Apple stock or I have Amazon stock. Those are different ownership stakes in those different companies. The value of that stock investment, and it rises and falls with the performance of the company. So if the company does really well, the value of the stock goes up. If the company doesn't do well, the value of the stock goes down. We always say, you could get lucky and pick a certain stock and have it do really well, but we recommend diversifying your assets, not having 100% of your assets in one stock, putting them in a couple different stocks or a couple different asset classes to make sure if one company does pretty poorly, maybe another one will do really well and vice versa, and it all kind of balances out for return purposes. So a mutual fund is a little bit different. This is essentially a basket of stocks or bonds, so multiple different funds within one mutual fund. Each mutual fund has a different investment objective, and again, there could be stocks, bonds, things like that. You invest in this mutual fund and you own different parts of what's in that one mutual fund. This is very similar to an ETF, an exchange-traded fund. Exchange-traded funds are also a basket of different stocks. Typically, they're a little bit more cost-effective than mutual funds, and they're traded a little bit differently than mutual funds, but it's a basket of more than one stock. So a mutual fund is not Apple stock, that's an individual stock. There could be certain stocks within a mutual fund, but again, there's more than one holding. When we look at different risks and return, different funds, asset classes, investment types have different levels of risks and different levels of return. The easiest one is obviously cash. So cash is low risk. It's a liquid investment. You can use it immediately to buy whatever you'd like. Low risk, however, low return. You're not going to put your money in cash and get a 10% return. It's just cash. There is some money markets that's paying 3, 4, 5% right now, which is a really great return. That's kind of a cash equivalent, still low risk, but relatively low return. If we move up the ladder, bonds is kind of next, international bonds, real estate, stocks, international stocks. This is just general guidance. Different funds have different levels of risks and return. The message here is that be really intentional about how you're investing. If you are someone who likes to be pretty conservative, it doesn't make sense to put all of your funds in international stocks. And on the flip side, if you're someone who wants to be conservative, maybe you want to be in bonds, you want to be aggressive, maybe be in international stocks, all of this kind of fits together as you're thinking about your portfolio. Question 3, so how do I know how much risk to take? We cover this slide every time we come out and do education for our 401k plan, so you might have seen it before if you've attended one of those sessions. This shows about what your stock, bond, money market, which is cash, equivalent exposure should be as you're entering retirement. A common question that we get is, I am going to retire, so that should I sell all of my assets and move to cash? The answer is no. You still want to be invested so that you're keeping up with the rate of inflation. If you are someone who is younger and you have 30 or 40 years before retirement, you can afford to take on a little bit more risk, which means you can have more stocks than bonds in your portfolio. The reason being, if you are 30 years old, market drops 10% tomorrow, that's okay for you because you're not going to be drawing those funds to pay for expenses. You're going to keep them in there. It's going to rebound and grow until you get to retirement. On the flip side, if you're in retirement and the market drops 10, 20, 30%, you are going to feel that hit a little bit more because you're likely taking distributions to pay for your bills. So that's when it makes sense to reduce your stock exposure. So get a little bit less stock in your portfolio and increase your bond exposure. Again, we don't recommend selling everything and just keeping your funds in cash. Although it feels safe and protected for a lot of people, the account doesn't keep up with inflation. So if inflation's 2, 3, 4, 5, 10%, whatever it is that year, your account isn't going to keep up with that and keep up with kind of your spending and expenses. So keep everything invested. However, adjust your stock to bond ratio as you get older and as you move throughout your career. Question 4. So how do investment advisors get compensated? This is a question that we get often or people don't know how to ask. And so we're going to cover what the different levels of fiduciaries are and then different questions you can ask a potential investment advisor. So there's a lot on this slide, but just want to cover kind of the 3 different buckets for fiduciary standards. The first one is a broker-dealer. This is someone who's held to what's called a best interest standard. So putting something that's in the best interest for their clients, but they can still earn commissions and sell different products, which could potentially create conflicts of interest. They do have to disclose these conflicts, but they don't have a fiduciary duty or requirement to act solely in your best interest. So they're putting you in a product or service that is a good fit for you, but they still could earn commissions. RIAs, or registered investment advisors, they are held to a fiduciary standard, meaning they are legally obligated to act in your best interest. They typically charge fees for their services either as a percentage of assets, so a percentage of AUM, so assets under management, or an hourly or fixed fee basis. Banks and trust companies, they're regulated at different levels. They perform, trust duties, things like that. Everything they do is in a fiduciary capacity. So just like RIAs, they're legally obligated to act in your best interests. Fees are charged for services, not for commissions or other products. So this really puts at the forefront of conversations your best interest in putting what you need first before selling products and services and things like that. TrustPoint is a fiduciary, meaning we legally have to act in the best interest of our clients. If you're looking for a new financial professional or financial advisor, highly recommend asking them if they are a fiduciary and how they implement them in their practice. I would ask anyone you're looking to work with for financial services and see what they say. And again, to really consider, are they selling you a product or service and how are they getting compensated? Here we show different compensation methods. So there's fee-only advisors and fee-based advisors. A fee-only advisor is you as the client are paying the advisor a fee for their services. So there's no commissions, there's no conflict of interest. They're held to that fiduciary standard. You may be paying an hourly charge, maybe a flat rate charge, maybe you're paying a percentage of assets that they're managing, so an AUM fee. All of those are fee-only compensation methods. If you're working with someone who's fee-based, they are also getting that fee. So maybe it's an AUM fee, maybe it's a flat fee, an hourly fee, whatever that is, but they're also getting different fee kickbacks. So maybe they're getting a kickback from the investment that they're putting you in. Maybe they're getting commission from selling you insurance or annuities. Neither one of these, is better than the other. It depends what you specifically are looking for. It's just important to understand what you're paying for and how your advisor is getting compensated. For reference, TrustPoint is fee only. We do not sell products, or we don't get kickbacks or commissions from different funds that clients are invested in. So what does this mean? What should you ask your investment advisor? First question is, how are you compensated? We talk to a lot of people who are afraid to ask this question, nervous to ask this question. You may ask this question and get a packet of information that you don't understand. It's never wrong to push back and say, can you walk through this with me? Or what does this mean for my investments? Super, super important if you're paying for service that you understand what you're paying and what service you're getting for that payment. You can ask, do you sell any products? Are you a fiduciary? Will I be paying any commissions or transaction costs? And will you be actively managing my portfolio? So sometimes people work with investment advisor who they put them in a certain investment fund and then it's not actively managed, meaning they put them in that fund and it just kind of sits there until the client says they want to move, or it's not being actively managed day to day. So if that's your expectation, just be sure you ask who you're trying to work with. Will you be actively managing my portfolio? Again, just want to emphasize, always ask for a fee schedule and take the time to walk through that. If you don't understand it, totally fine. There's a lot of different terms and things that different advisors use. Just ask your advisor to take some time and walk through how they're getting paid and how that affects your portfolio. So question number 5. Does everyone retire at 65? So I do a lot of retirement plans, financial plans with clients. They ask, what is the average age for retirement? I hear a lot of people are retiring at 55 and 60. Is that the norm? What does that look like? Here we have some different retirement statistics, which I think are actually pretty interesting. So average retirement age is 62, with the caveat that it's not always the person's choice. So sometimes people have to leave the workforce because they are caring for aging parents, or their spouse is ill, or maybe they are ill. Maybe they're laid off. Maybe they want to retire at 62. The average age is 62, but again, a lot of factors come into play with that number. Women on average retire 2 years prior to men, so kind of interesting there. 59% of people plan to work in retirement. I would say, kind of anecdotally, more and more people that I'm doing planning for plan to work part-time in retirement, and it's typically, it could be to make extra money, but a lot of people actually do that to have something to do to fill their time. People go from working a full-time job to retiring and not having a lot to fill their time with. So they go back to work, either working at some place they like or a nonprofit they're passionate about. Maybe they volunteer their time with something. So really common to go back to work in retirement. You're not the only one if you're kind of in that camp and thinking about doing that as you enter normal retirement for your previous full-time job. 27% of retirees report that their spending amounts are higher than they can afford. Super, super common. When we do financial planning, we talk about budgeting. What is your budget? What are you spending each month? What does that look like? A lot of people, when they actually put pen to paper and figure out what that number is it's much higher than they had originally thought. And then 33% of older adults will live in a nursing home at some point in their lives. This cost for a nursing home or assisted living is super, super high. Not something to get nervous over, but something to prepare for and think about as you're working through your financial plan. A couple of retirement statistics. This is from Empower. So the average retirement savings balance is listed here for different ages, 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way to 80s. We can see the average retirement balance and the median retirement balance. Obviously, the sooner you start saving, the quicker your account is going to grow. I'll have on the next slide different checkpoints you should try to reach, but this is just a study was done showing the average retirement balance. You can see when you're in your 60s, that peaks. That's typically when people retire, and then you start to spend down your assets as you get into your 70s, 80s, and 90s. Are you on track for retirement? One of the other super common questions we get from people is, how much do I have to retire? Is it a couple $100,000? Is it 500,000? Is it 5 million? What's the magic number? This chart shows different checkpoints that you should try to hit Oops, my numbers are a little bit off, but try to hit as you're going through your career. So if I'm 30, I should have about 1 times my salary saved. The goal is by the time you're 67 to have between 8 and 10 times your salary saved for retirement. A lot of people see this and they start to panic because they're not close to where they quote should be. These are just general checkpoints. Things to consider are, does your spouse have an income and are they saving for retirement? Do you have a pension in place? Do you have other factors that come into play as you're thinking about your retirement savings? All of that kind of factors into this chart. In general, you spend about 75% of your pre-retirement income in retirement. And this is because you're not saving for retirement anymore, so you don't have those expenses. A lot of times people have a mortgage paid off, so they don't have that mortgage cost anymore. So 75% is about what to expect. The top concerns or mistakes that I see from people are probably saving too little and not knowing how much to save. We tell people to save between 10 and 15% of your income each year, specifically for retirement. This includes anything your employer puts in the plan. So if they're putting in 6%, you're putting in 4%, perfect. That gets you to the 10%. However, if you want to retire early, you're going to have to save a little bit more than that. So maybe you have to save 15 to 20% or 20 to 25%. It all depends on what your retirement date is. The other big one, I touched on this before, is underestimating your lifestyle. So not truly understanding how much you're spending. Highly recommend, if you have some time over the next couple weeks, to sit down with your family and figure out what is your income and what are your expenses. Write it down on paper and see what that total is. A lot of people, again, are shocked at how much they're spending because they're going out to eat, or maybe they have different subscriptions that they forget about, or maybe they have different memberships. All of those costs can add up pretty quickly. So once you have that budget number in place, then it's a little bit easier to figure out how much you're going to have to save to pay for that in retirement. So again, how much will you need? We touched on this a little bit, but healthcare costs are getting higher and higher. Don't panic about this, but know it's something that does come into play. A lot of people think when they retire that Medicare covers 100% of their healthcare costs, and that is not accurate. You will still have to pay something for healthcare. When we do financial planning, we plan a little bit longer than this. We plan for women to live to 94 and men to 92. On average, people are living longer and longer, which is fantastic. Healthcare is getting better and better. But that means by the time you retire to the end of your life, that might be 20 or 30 years that you're going to have to draw on your assets from to pay for different costs. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about, if I want to retire at 55, I might have to live 30 or 40 years into retirement. If I retire at 65 or 70, that number might be a little bit shorter. Think about all of these things with your spouse or partner as you're saving and trying to nail down that retirement date. So how do you save for retirement? Most people, or a lot of people, have a 401k or 403b. That is a retirement account through your employer. If you are maxing that out, or if you want a different option, there are a couple different buckets, I'll call them, that you can save money into. One that's coming up more and more with people is called an after-tax account. This is either an individual account, joint account, revocable trust account. These are accounts that don't have contribution limits. You can put in as much as you want, and it's not specifically for retirement. So people can put in funds and take them out later to buy a car, to go on vacation, or to use to pay for weddings for kids. It's not specifically tied up to an age for distributions or specifically for retirement. It's kind of a nice additional bucket to put money into as you're thinking about your overall financial picture. And then the other two buckets are the different, we have 401ks on here, but IRAs as well. So you could do a pre-tax or traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. The difference between these two is the timing of when you're going to pay tax. So if you're contributing to a Roth IRA, you're paying the tax now, grows and grows and grows. You're not paying tax when it's distributed. If you're contributing to a traditional IRA, you're not paying the tax now. account grows and grows and grows. You pay the tax when you take the distribution in retirement. A lot of people want to save in multiple buckets so that when you retire and you need funds to pay for a bill, you have different options. The overall goal of financial planning, or one of the goals, is to pay the least amount of tax possible as you're taking distributions. If you have all of your funds in a traditional IRA or pre-tax 401k, that means everything you take out in retirement is going to be taxed as ordinary income. That's going to put you in a pretty high tax bracket if you need a lot of distributions throughout the year. That's why it's nice to have some funds in both the pre-tax and the Roth, so you can kind of balance those, work with your tax preparer and your financial planner to figure out what bucket to take funds from if you need funds throughout the year. Another part of this is Social Security. So when do people claim benefits? Throughout financial planning, we talk about the optimal time to claim your Social Security benefits. Everyone has what's called an FRA, or full retirement age. This is the age that you can collect 100% of your Social Security benefit. If you take your assets or take Social Security prior to that age, it's going to be permanently reduced. Your monthly payment is permanently reduced. If you decide to elect taking Social Security after your full retirement age, it's going to be permanently increased. So your monthly payment is going to be higher than what it would have been if you have taken it at your full retirement age. Here you can see when people typically take benefits. On average, when I'm doing planning, I see a lot of people take it maybe too early. There's misconception out there that, Social Security is going away completely. I'm not going to get my payments. It will likely have to change in some way to be able to fund payments. Maybe that full retirement age is moved out, or maybe benefits are reduced. There will be some sort of change, but this Social Security will be in place for people. It just may look a little bit different. So this comes into play. Obviously, if you need funds, either you can collect Social Security or pull from your investment assets. People have different opinions, different thoughts. The financial plan can really help determine what the best timing of taking Social Security is, and what that break even is of, do I draw Social Security or do I draw from my investment assets first? Question 6, should I pay off debt or save for retirement? Another common question that we get, and a lot of people are pretty timid to talk about debt. Not all debt is bad debt, so just want to throw that out there. If you have a mortgage or a car payment, that's not really bad debt. A lot of people have that. If you have credit card debt, probably best to try to pay that down because the interest rate is probably pretty high. So there's two basic methods you can choose when deciding how to pay down your debt. There's the debt snowball and debt avalanche. So with the debt snowball, this is where you make minimum payments on all of your credit cards except for the one with the smallest balance. You then pay as much as you can on the one with the smallest balance until it's paid off. Once that's paid off, you move to the next smallest, and then the next smallest, and the next smallest until everything is paid off. If you want to do the debt avalanche approach, that's where you still make those minimum payments on all your credit cards, but the one with the highest interest rate, you pay as much as you can until it's paid off. Then you move to the next highest rate, next highest rate, next highest rate, until everything is paid off. There's pros and cons to each of these. So if you're someone who has a lot of debt with very high interest rates, it probably makes sense to do the debt avalanche. If you're someone who needs more of that immediate gratification, you want to see some quick progress, you want to see stuff paid off sooner, that's where the debt snowball is going to come into play. Typically, it makes more financial sense to pay off the highest interest rate debt first because you're paying a ton of interest in that. However, again, if you want to make progress sooner on certain cards or feel overwhelmed by having different cards out there, the debt snowball method is not a bad option. So there's no bad way to do this. It's just important to make sure you pick a strategy and kind of stick with it as you're making payments. So weighing your options. So should I invest or should I pay off debt? Here we show if you pay off $100,000 or invest $100,000, what that interest saved could be. So if you pay off $100,000 at 4.5% interest 10 years early, you would have saved $24,000 in interest, which is fantastic. If you would have invested $100,000 at 5% return over that 10-year period, you have earned $64,000. So the thing to keep in mind is the interest rate of the debt that you're trying to pay off. So is it 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? And then the investment return that you expect to get over the next 5, 10, 15 years. If your interest rate is 15% on a credit card, and then if you could invest and get 5%, it makes more sense to pay off that 15% interest rate. However, if you refinance during the COVID time, your mortgage is 2.5%, and you can invest and earn 7%, it probably makes sense to invest and not make extra payments on that mortgage. So again, the interest rate comes into play of the debt that you're paying off, as well as the investment return of what you could invest over time. So last question for today, question 7 is, what happens to my old 401k funds? So I did a little research, and there's a statistic out there that says there's $1.6 trillion in retirement assets that have been forgotten. Now, I just want to say they classify forgotten as assets in prior employer 401k plan. So if you worked somewhere before, you're at a new employer, and you didn't move that old 401k balance, that's considered a forgotten 401k balance. Regardless, even if the actual amount of forgotten accounts is half of that, or a third of that, a ton of people forget about old 401k accounts or old IRA accounts or old bank accounts, whatever it is. So don't let yourself become part of that statistic. So the biggest thing I see when doing planning is people forget about older accounts because they've left employment somewhere and they had a couple $1,000 in there, $10,000 in there. They think, oh, I didn't have much in there. Every dollar counts, and you've earned it and you've saved it and it's invested. So don't forget about it. So if you leave an employer, you had a 401k there, you can sometimes leave it in your old 401k. You could roll it to your new 401k or an IRA, or you could withdraw that balance, so cash it out. We don't recommend this because if you cash that out, you're going to have significant tax implications. Regardless, if you have a 401k at an old provider, don't forget about it. Roll it over, or just make sure you're tracking it on your financials or your own kind of personal spreadsheets. So what is a rollover? So this is when you're rolling over funds from one retirement plan to another. So oftentimes we see people rolling over a 401k balance to an IRA. Maybe they're rolling over IRA to IRA. Maybe it's a 403b to IRA. There's a whole chart out there from the IRS that says which plans are eligible for rollovers. If you have an account that you think is eligible, talk to your financial professional, your financial advisor. They can talk about different pros and cons of what that can look like for you. So if you roll over to your new 401k or an IRA, it's typically easier because you have fewer accounts to manage and less to keep track of. If you have an old 401k from an old provider and something happens to that company and they change providers or they're acquired, it can create some confusion and maybe miscommunication. So it's important to keep track of everything. And then you could also have potential cost savings. So if you have fewer accounts, maybe you have a different fee schedule, maybe you have different investment options, things like that. So all things to consider as you're thinking about rolling over funds or thinking about old 401ks and what to do with them. If you roll over the funds to an IRA, this is when it was an employer plan and now it's an individual account. So an IRA is an individual retirement account. This is a one-on-one relationship with you and your investment advisor. So it's not through a company like your 401k, it's just you. So if you switch jobs, that's okay because the IRA is not tied to a specific employer. Oftentimes by doing this, you get additional services like financial planning, different investment management advice. It's a higher level of service than if you just have a 401k. It's important to remember that you cannot contribute to a 401k you're no longer participating in. So if you have left employment to be a stay-at-home parent, let's say, and you had a 401k at your old company, now you are not employed by a company, you're just at home, you can't contribute to that 401k because you're no longer working there. That's a perfect opportunity to roll that 401k to an IRA. Again, that's not tied to an employer, and then you can start making IRA contributions to that. Another kind of plus of rolling over to an IRA is you're able to do Roth conversions. So if you have a lot of those traditional or pre-tax dollars, you can convert those to Roth dollars. You'll pay the tax, but however, they're in that Roth bucket so that when you take them out in retirement for qualified distributions, you don't have to pay the tax at that time because you've already paid the tax. And then just better communication, again, because you're working with a one-on-one relationship with an investment advisor. There's a little bit more oversight to how your account is invested, and then advice can be involved as well. So those were the questions I wanted to cover today. We do have an upcoming in-person education session, which we're super excited about. October 14th from 5 to 6 p.m. at the La Crescent Area Event Center. We're covering retirement readiness, so plan and secure for your future. We're going to take a deeper dive into Social Security. What does that mean? What does that look like? We're going to talk about Medicare. We're going to talk about different spending strategies, withdrawal strategies. So I would say if you are within a couple years, 5 years of retirement, this is a super great session to go to. No cost to this, so feel free to scan the QR code if you want to attend. If you want more information, feel free to reach out to myself or anyone on the Emerj360 team, and we can cover that as well. Lastly, just want to mention, we do help individuals with investment management and financial planning. If you're looking for specific advice or just want general information on how a rollover works or investments, things like that, feel free to reach out to us. We have a QR code to look at our website and to also schedule a meeting with us. Again, we service any relationship coming to TrustPoint that's between $50,000 all the way up to $1 million. And that is all that I had today. So we did record today's webinar. We'll be sending out in the next couple days to you all. If you have questions, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.